Thank you so much. I always enjoy conversing and having a conversation and presenting with and to family historians and people interested in their family story. I'm slightly um, apprehensive, I guess is the best word, about this evening's presentation. I'm following a lot of great presenters. We had an awesome presenter on Tuesday showing us all about Find My Past. We've had awesome presenters really since March of last year in this virtual platform here. Um, these presenters show us new things, cool ways of navigating websites. And I decided to have a methodology talk this evening. And I know methodology is like, oh, gosh, that's dry, that's boring. I don't have any shiny objects to show you. I really don't necessarily, emphasis on necessarily, have a new website or a new shiny something to show you. But I really think methodology is so important. And my team agreed with me that here in January, it might be a good idea to not only have a beginning session, but to talk a little bit about how we do research. One of the neat things about tonight and all of your cameras being off, you don't have to worry about your face turning red or your eyes rolling if I happen to hit a nerve, something that you should do that you're not doing, or something that you are doing that you shouldn't be doing. But I think methodology is so important. As we assist people, and we love helping people find their family stories, find and interpret records, to do better research and to find more of their story, some things become pretty evident to us, that we don't spend as much time as we should being thorough, and we don't spend as much time as we should trying to gather all the information we possibly can. I joke with people, and I can't see your faces, which is, again, probably a good thing. But I joke with people, most of our ancestors, they're dead, and likely they're going to stay that way. So there's no real hurry to get there because we know there really isn't any there, right? Every person we find, there's two more questions at least. Who's that person's mother? Who's that person's father? So let's get on with it. Critical connections, putting the pieces together. That's the critical connection. Finding all the pieces and putting all the pieces together. If we're really about finding our family stories, it's way more than begets and begots. Names, dates, and places are the framework upon which we should hang our family stories, make them more robust, make them complete. In my way of thinking, records plus history equals stories. We don't spend a lot of time. I fear many of us don't spend much time at all on the history. The why are they there? What are they doing? All we worry about is the hatched, matched, and dispatched. And it really should be, well, what happens around those events, in between those events, because of those events, or what generated those events? Again, I'm so convinced that doing the history really helps us out a lot. So, ironically, preparing for this presentation, a colleague of mine wrote a pretty amazing article that's going to be published at the end of the month in our Genealogy Gems. It's an e-zine, electronic newsletter that's published by the Genealogy Center. You all can sign up for it, look for it on our homepage. But she made this astute observation, Elizabeth, our colleague. As anyone researching their family history knows, a family story is much bigger than names, dates, and locations. Records can tell us things such as someone's date of birth, where they lived, or what their profession was, but they do not always illuminate the context of why our ancestors made certain choices. I think that's a very astute observation. And I would propose to you that trying to answer more why questions will lead us to more records and more information that will help us avoid some of those proverbial brick walls that we all kind of resent running into as frequently as we do. Records plus history equals our stories. We're not going to have as complete as stories if we're not looking for the history and everything that goes around those records. So I want to talk about two concepts. You've probably all heard of both of these. You certainly have heard of the second one. That's the big thing, genealogical proof standard. But before the genealogical proof standard, There was a touted strategy called the preponderance of evidence. How do we know this is true? It's based on the preponderance of evidence. I still like that phrase because it has the word evidence in it. And that's really, in a way, what we're trying to do, collect evidence. More than a few people have cautioned me, Curt, you should stop comparing our families to crime scenes. Whenever you say gather evidence, make me think I'm going to a crime scene. Well, I have to disclose that I am a big fan of NCIS and all of the other affiliate NCISs. Great shows. They're fun. But what we really are doing as family historians, as people gathering our stories, we really are looking for data, evidence, information. Put whatever phrase you want to with it. Why do I focus on evidence? Because I think it seriouses me up. It's like, yeah, I need to find everything. How do you solve a crime? You don't just pick up one piece of evidence and say, ah, yep, it was this. You gather a lot of evidence. I like to use the moon and Swiss cheese as an example. If you use one just really pedestrian, visual, I'm going to use the term loosely, evidence, you can hold a piece of Swiss cheese up to a night sky, glance at it, and glance at the moon and see some similarities. And with just that solo piece of evidence and only that kind of very squishy G, round circles, G, not very much form or consistency, I think the moon's made out of Swiss cheese. Well, you haven't gathered nearly enough evidence to support that particular hypothesis. So I really like the idea of evidence. Under the preponderance of evidence, the burden of proof is met when the party with the burden, meaning the party trying to prove something, convinces the fact finder that there's at least a greater than 50% chance that the claim is true. So I have to prove to you there's at least a better than 50% chance. That's really squishy, isn't it? That's really hard to wrap our arms around or even wrap our minds around. But again, I still like the evidence concept because of this. A lot of people over the years muse to one another and then goes, why do they tape off so much area? Well, sometimes they tape off a big area, then they tape off an internal area. Why do you think they tape off such a big area at a crime scene? Because they're doing strategically what we should be doing, trying to gather all the evidence. So if we look at the internal taped off section, we can see a few things, little evidence markers, little number evidence markers by the outline's leg and just above the shoulder of the outline. But notice all the other four circles on the right-hand side and this question mark over here, like what happened here? Is this a dent in the road? Did this cause the accident? Was this an escape route? Blood, is that from being hit? Is that from being shot? We don't know. But if we just settle for this, we may never find the answer. I fear that as family historians, we settle for what's in the white square. We focus so much on the person, birth date, marriage date, death date. Okay, I need to find their parents. Like, wait a minute. We hardly know anything about this person. Birth, marriage, and death hardly tells us a thing. It's in filling out that person's history that we will find more information that will provide us with more clues, more springboards, more jumping off points. So when I go and look at figurative crime scene, when I'm looking for some information about an ancestor, I'm trying to cast the net as wide as possible. So using this analogy, which people have told me I shouldn't compare family history to crime scenes, but this is what I'm looking for when I am trying to do family story, family history well. I'm not focusing on just that white square, just that body. I'm focusing on not only the evidence markers that we saw before, but all of the other evidence markers that really weren't necessarily that clear and things where I have questions. And this might sound a little stretched for you. And I said I was apprehensive about this presentation. So if something happened to this person, could something have been knocked off and fell into this crack, fell into this ravine on the side of the road, fell off over here? Look at all these things we really should be exploring. What's this graffiti? Was that before or after the accident? Is it related to the accident or not? What's this over here? This looks like it could have been scraped, or maybe it's just decaying. So many questions. That's why crime scene investigators cast such a wide taped off area, make such a wide taped off area. And that's why you and I, as researchers, should cast a wide net. We should have as a goal, and I know it's kind of impossible, but a goal, a goal. We should have as a goal to find all the evidence about a particular individual. We'll fall short 99.9% of the time, but finding all the evidence, if we have that as a goal, we will find much more than we typically will if we just focus figuratively on that white square. I hope that makes sense. So let's go to the genealogical proof standard. This is touted understandably throughout the community. This is how you do research. Sometimes it's even like weaponized and we beat over the head with it. Got to do the genealogical proof standard. It's not a big scary thing. 5 points. Reasonably exhaustive research has been conducted. That kind of supports what we just said, right? We're trying to find all the evidence. Not all the evidence that's on Ancestry. Not all the evidence that's easily findable. All the evidence. Reasonably exhaustive. Second, each statement of fact has a complete and accurate source citation. So these are the golden words here. Reasonably exhaustive research, complete and accurate citation, right? 3 and 4, the evidence is reliable and has been skillfully correlated and interpreted. Any contradictory evidence has been resolved. The words that pay, reliable, skillfully correlated and interpreted, contradictory evidence has been resolved. The 5th and final point, the conclusion has been soundly reasoned and coherently written. So soundly reasoned and coherent. Those are the phrases that pay. So this is what we're tasked to do. This is our methodology. Find it all. Reasonably exhaustive search. Make sure we know where it comes from. And do we put it together in a reliable, skillful way? Is there contradictory evidence that we need to do something with? This doesn't apply. This does apply. I need to figure out. I need to explain what that means. And then soundly reasoned and coherent. There are sometimes we can make some wild stretches because we want so badly to fill in the blank, be a pioneer in a particular society, get a Civil War society lineage certificate, etc. But if we're really about finding our family story, not someone else's family story, masquerading as our family story, then we want to do this. So I'm going to take you on a trip through some records. There'll be a section that is ripped from today's headlines, as they say, on the cable and network TV, ripped from today's headlines. There'll be 2 examples that took place this week, one on Monday and one on Tuesday, I believe. Try not to glaze over. I know this won't hit your particular research, but again, we're not talking about a specific database or a specific shining object. I'm just showing you how I have approached some of my research because I started with not a lot of information. I started with parents who were not interested in the past and really thought, and my mother still thinks genealogy is kind of silly. That's the phrase she uses, with a pleasant smile on her face, of course. Well, Curt, it's just kind of silly. So I started out with basically very little. So I scratched for a lot. But you can still find so much if we do the history, doing the history. So very important. Many of you may have heard me say this before, and some of you are probably even rolling your eyes like, oh, brother, here he goes again. Well, really, we should do the history persistently, comprehensively. We simply don't do that enough. And that needs to change because we create problems for ourselves by not finding all the data. So we don't springboard, we don't discover new records, new individuals that can provide us yet more information. And we kind of throw up our hands and say, oh, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. No, the hopelessness only comes when we're not willing to do the history, to do a little bit of exploring. Not everything we do is going to automatically generate one more person we can put on our tree. Not going to happen. But we may do 3 hours, 3 days, yes, maybe even 3 months of history around an area, a time period, and an individual to find enough data to say, this is where I should be looking next for a record or the next generation back. So I'm just such a big fan of histories. I've been taken to task by a few people over the years, and I hear what they're saying. I don't agree with them, but I hear what they're saying. They say, Curt, you spend way too much time talking about and pointing out and almost bragging on secondary sources. Most compiled histories are secondary sources as opposed to primary sources. I smile, I shake my head knowingly, and in my mind, I say all the time, and with my lips and tongue, sometimes I actually say, yeah, but. Yeah, but the secondary sources, if carefully looked at, carefully evaluated, will often lead us to primary sources or lead us to places that will lead us to primary sources. So if you don't know where a primary source is, or maybe there isn't a primary source and you're trying to engage the genealogical proof standard, you're going to want to find everything that's out there. So I can kind of embrace the genealogical proof standard because it doesn't say only primary sources. It says reasonably exhaustive search, right? For everything. So I'm a big fan of compiled histories if we use them well. And it's not just the mug books. They're useful, quite useful in some instances, but there are many other kinds of histories: ethnic, religious, organizational, bench and bar, rich and famous, educational, you name it. There are so many. How do we find those? That's in your handout, so don't worry about writing this down, but we live in the best of times. There are amazing channels, silos on the internet for us to freely access this information. Worldcat.org, you could spend a whole evening playing with worldcat.org, looking for histories based on the geography of where you know your ancestors may have lived, their ethnic group, their religion, their organization, anything about them. Internet Archive, oh my gosh, the digitizing that many partners have done, including this library, including the Genealogy Center, both Internet Archive and Family Search's digital library, hundreds of thousands of sources, histories that we should be looking at. And of course, our good friend Google. Some people kind of smirk at Google like, oh yeah, of course, Kurt's going to say, just Google it. Well, a lot of people say just Google it because Google's a pretty powerful tool. Do we have to sort through some of the noise that Google presents? Absolutely. That's what we do as researchers, right? We sort through, we winnow the chaff out of the wheat, right? Other places we can look for histories of locales, the Genealogy Center, this library, our catalog. The next 4 bullet points: public libraries in your towns and counties. What do I mean by your towns and counties? Well, the towns and counties where you believe, or whether you, or where you've proven that you have ancestors. The public libraries are your amazing sort of research agents in the towns and counties where your ancestors have lived. So public libraries, historical societies in your towns and counties, state libraries in the states where your ancestors live, state historical societies. There's so much richness. And I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. How many of you have really done a thorough literature search, if you will, for the public libraries in the places where you have family story interest, the historical societies, the state libraries, and the state historical societies? I'm venturing to guess very few hands would proverbially go up because we haven't done that. We just haven't done that because we're looking for the records. We're looking to get back one more generation. And oftentimes these histories won't give us that one more generation specifically, directly, but indirectly, yes. So when we use these histories, let's stop text diving for surnames. Of course, we're going to look for surnames. Who wouldn't? We'd be irresponsible if we didn't pick up a history, right? And go to the index and say, are my Witchers, Englerts, Gogels, and Shooks in this index? Oh, darn, they're not. Toss the book away. No, don't toss the book away. Say, okay, my surnames aren't there. Let's stop the text diving and moving on practice. Let's go to the actual text block and see how it's organized and see what we can do with it. And I'm just going to share with you at sort of a high level because we don't have all evening and you probably wouldn't hang with me all evening, and that's perfectly fine. But let's look how I have in some short, quick quips, if you will, approach this challenge. So my family, being rich and famous as they are, not. There are at least 5 very significant histories of Jasper, Indiana, and or Du Bois County, Indiana, the county in which Jasper is. And guess what? My direct lines are not found in the indices of any of them. So the heck with them, right? Not of any use to me. My family's not listed in the index. Well, I'm kind of out of luck. No, I, I just need to work in it, right? Why should I care about them? Because I want to do the history. I want to find out. I know I have family there for many, as in 4 or 5 generations. So why aren't they in the indexes? That's a whole question for another day. But what else can I find out about them? So let's take a look. So I know the slide is pretty horrible, but I wanted to show you, this doesn't say Jasper history. This says Jasper area history. And I may be stretching things a little bit, but to me, that's a clue. It's like you really can't talk about the history of Jasper unless you talk about the area of Jasper. And the area isn't just Du Bois County. It's the county to the west of that, Davies County, and the county south of that, Vanderburgh County. And before you realize that, you're going to have a hard time putting all the pieces together. So reading these histories shows some pretty deep and interesting relationships between Germans, one of my main ethnic origin channels. You're going to have a hard time putting all those pieces together, right? So Jasper area history. So the gentleman who wrote this history, obviously a proud German, and obviously kind of a little like boastful, bragging of maybe a little bit, because of my German heritage from the area. He's going to emphasize the area because, of course, I'm emphasizing this because it's important to me. That's okay. That's quite all right. But he kind of gives a nice history here. And he continues his history about talking about the area of Alsace-Lorraine, how it's divided up, where you find different things, what's more French, what's more German, where different countries fall on geographic boundaries and geographic entities in that area. Talks about the history of the area where Germans in southern Indiana emigrated from. You might say, okay, Curt, I don't really care. I'm just looking for my ancestors. Why aren't you looking for your ancestors? Well, I oftentimes find that it's a challenge, right? To bridge the Great Pond, to find that place in the old country where our ancestors emigrated from. Well, these histories can narrow the big wide world, Europe, or Alsace-Lorraine, or France, or Belgium, or Germany, down to more specific regions or departments in the case of France, or actual towns. Don't we want that? If you have the whole world to look in, oh my gosh, that's going to take a long time. We're used to looking for a needle in a haystack. This gives us the needle in the haystack. You know what's worse than looking for a needle in a haystack? Looking for a piece of straw in a haystack. And I think doing the history helps find the needles as opposed to straw that really blends in more. So it talks about what drove people to come to the New World. Really important. Of course, this is a pretty braggadocious statement too, isn't it? So the German immigrated with his sturdy character, law-abiding instincts, nature for hard work, honesty, intelligence. Okay, we get it. But it talks a little bit, the second paragraph, on how long the trip took. And sometimes when we're trying to figure out when to look for particular things, that's helpful, right? More information about the settling of Jasper. St. Joseph Church, big, prominent place for German Catholics in that southern Indiana area. If we miss the fact, and we probably have to be almost comatose to miss the fact that St. Joseph Catholic Church played a huge role, and this guy, Joseph Kundek, we will see him over and over and over again, because besides being a Catholic priest from Croatia, he was an immigration agent who wanted German-speaking Catholics to populate southern Indiana. So pretty amazing. So he kept growing the parish, kept kept growing, and you'll find him all over the place. So I went from a couple dozen families to where it shows you in that second paragraph, a congregation of 1,700 when he died in 1857. Notice at the very bottom of that slide, he helped found parishes in Ferdinand, Buda, Celestine, and Rockport, and he brought the Sisters of Providence to this great area. So, of course, being a typical genealogist, I look in the biographical section of this. Of course, I don't find any of my primary families, Butchers, Reynolds, Gogols, Shooks, Anglerts, none of those people. But this name struck me well. It's like, in my family tree, my great aunt married my great aunt on my mother's side married a Welsh. And I bet German in the right place. This is a dude I need to keep an eye on. I need to watch this guy. And notice quickly in this biographical sketch. So he grew up in Jasper, right? It shows you where my cursor's moving around, right? He grew up in Jasper, only child of these two individuals. Tells you where grandparents were born. And moving on, you see that he born in Jasper, but other folks were in the county next door. And you'll find that the family moved, if we had the whole biographical snippet, between Evansville, Washington, and Jasper, Davies County, DuBois County, Vanderburgh County. So it continues to emphasize to me, I need to keep an eye on relationships and movements of families and intermarrying of families in that 3-county area. To me, that's of consequence to my family history. Of course, a wonderful picture. We love pictures of our ancestors and potential ancestors. And Vernon is a second-generation American through his grandfather who emigrated from Augsburg, Germany, 1892, signed the Oath of Fidelity in Prince George County, Maryland. For me, that was a what? Prince George County, Maryland. I wouldn't have quite put that on the immigration path radar. So it's just another thing for me to consider as I'm trying to flush out all of my family history. I love bibliographies and endnotes, and every one of these histories has a good bibliography, which leads to other places and other resources. I've often identified as a citation analysis nut. I love bibliographies and endnotes because they give us so much information. And so, and that history led me to another history where Ferdinand and other towns that Joseph Kundak, there he is again, helped found. So amazing the influence that this priest immigration agent had. And looking at these bibliographies and footnotes and endnotes often leads me to some wonderful sources. This is not a well-known source. It's a collaborated work between an Indiana University professor and a German university professor, written mostly in German. Oh my gosh, a book about Germans written in German. Who would have thought? But when we get over the challenge of translation, oh my goodness, this is a book about Germans in southern Indiana. Where am I researching? And what am I researching? I'm researching Germans in southern Indiana. So of course I want to take a look at this. I wouldn't have found this book if I was only interested in birth, marriage, and death, dates and places. But because I'm interested in the history, I find this book, it's a really great, it's a 4-page summary. It's A4 size paper, so it's longer than 8.5 by 11. Again, we could spend more time than we have. But not only does he settle or study Germans in southern Indiana, studied 2 counties and 2 townships in those 2 counties. So my county of DuBois and one over on the western side of the state, Knox County. So, oh my goodness, the amount of information in this barely 100-page book is amazing. So they did a study of the 1860 residents of these 2 counties. And here's my county of interest, Ferdinand. They basically did for me, again, they put the needle amongst the hay in the haystack. So these are where all the people Germans who living in that one township in DuBois County, near Jasper, around the pie, that's where those Germans came from. That's their area of origin. What do I have here? I have like a key. So now it's not just anywhere in Germany, anywhere in a German city state. It's these. Yeah, there are a few of them, but I now have a, a research key. I'm fascinated by maps. So notice the white shading here. It almost looks like a T across left to right where my cursor's going, and then up and down here. This white shaded area are where German Catholics are living. And lo and behold, my ancestors are in this town, and Jasper down here in this town. The darker color are German Protestants. I just think it's fascinating how people settle out. Is that good to know? Absolutely. It helps again guide our research. In this wonderful source, Joseph Kundek is listed over and over and over again. Of course, I looked for the bibliography, and it has a nice little bibliography in it. And lo and behold, a lot of them are in German, but many are English sources as well. Just to show you kind of how nuts I am and we need to be, several years ago, when I was down for my godmother's funeral, they had this amazing literature rack, which didn't have just bulletins and solicitations as most churches have, but they had historical literature. I call it backup church literature. So there's Joseph Kundek again. It recounts his history, has a nice little something about him. But I picked up a couple of commemorative things about when the church was refurbished. Look at this. This church has resided over its history since 1837 in 3 different dioceses. Might that be of consequence when we're looking for records? We know that for Catholics, most of the records are kept at the church level. But if we wanted to expand our search and see what else might be at the diocesan level, now we know we can't just stick with the Diocese of Evansville, current diocese. We have to look at Indianapolis and Vincennes as well. So doing the history continues to pay dividends. In this back of church literature, you have all the people that bought the stained glass windows. Again, it would be awesome to have a Witcher or a Gogol or an Engler there. Lo and behold, no. But we do get who did buy these stained glass windows. And if we didn't know, St. Anne's Society. What is the St. Anne's Society? Maybe that's a lead to something that might give us more data about our ancestor, about my ancestor. Regrettably, no, but it's something that we should need to explore. When I walked around that church property in 1998, just a few years ago, I was amazed, just gobsmacked by this plaque that's in the churchyard at St. Joseph Catholic Church. In 1847, 11 families from that particular place in Germany left for the United States. These families were, and it lists all the family names. This is like an immigration plaque from this place in Germany to Jasper, Indiana. And the voyage was a perilous one, as you can read. And it was so perilous that they prayed. At the height of the storm, Mr. George Bauman made a vow to erect a cross near the church in their new homeland. Wow. You're not going to find this in a record, a birth, marriage, or death record. So pretty amazing. So as we're looking to find more history, to do the history, I'm going to recommend this book to you. I did not put it on your handout because I bet you could remember this. I count this as many times as I possibly can. The Harvard Encyclopedia of American Ethnic Groups. It's an amazing compilation, out of print right now. Go to Amazon, go to Abe Books or Add All Books. Google it and see if there's any copies out there. Depending on the time of year, a copy could cost you $200 or $300. Wait. And then sometimes it's available for $10. I think I got mine for like $10 probably 25 years ago. It's just so important that I have my own personal copy of this. There's one here in the Genealogy Center. I think there may be 2 here in the Genealogy Center. But Harvard Encyclopedia of American Ethnic Groups, every single ethnic group that touched toe in America has a section in there with the bibliography. So the German section talks about how Germans came to this country and why they came to this country. Would that we had time to explore all of that. But it divides them up by time period, tells how they got to Ohio and Indiana farms. Just amazing information. Does it have vital records? Absolutely not. Does it mention a whole lot of people? No, not so much. but it gives us the migration paths. It gives us the pushes and the pulls of migration. Why did they leave? Why did they settle where they did? And some of the stuff can be kind of an aha moment for us, like, aha, I never thought of that. I should have thought of that, but I never thought of that. And tracking ancestors back to the coast and then across the Great Pond can be greatly enhanced by using these wonderful encyclopedic works like the Harvard Encyclopedia of American Ethnic Groups. And of course, every single section has a bibliography. I grabbed this bibliography from the section on Finns, just to show you another ethnic group. Indiana has a similar publication. I know not everyone is researching Hoosiers. One of our state's slogans, I should say, mantras, is the Crossroads of America. And the national highway, Highway 40, runs through Indiana. There's a reason why it's called the Crossroads of America, because a lot of people cross through here on their way to other places. I think today people are here on their way to other places. People in Indiana is a great resource for finding out about a particular ethnic group. And I picked on the French here because we do have French here in Allen County. And we have French in several southern Indiana counties. But let's say all you knew about a potential ancestor is, I think they were from France. I think they settled in Indiana. Doing the history will help you tremendously, particularly if you use this particular publication. So it tells us a little bit about where the majority of Eastern, France, border, etc., shows us where the departments of France, where people may have migrated from. This is the awesome part. I just extracted this out of the text. French born in southern Indiana were in close proximity to Cincinnati, and others settled along the Ohio River. These 4 southern Indiana counties. If you have French in southern Indiana in the 19th century, those are the counties you look in. You don't need to look anywhere else. You don't need to look in Du Bois County. You don't need to look in Knox County. You don't need to look in Marion County. Yeah, you may find a stray person or two on business or broke out on their own, but this is where they settled. In northern Indiana, it was Allen County. Why? They were drawn by available land and jobs. And in Allen County, where they settled, it was in proximity to churches. Where were the churches? Amazing to me. This is like a roadmap, a research guide for French in Indiana. How can you not use that, right? So just a little bit more about French, which I just extracted right out of that Peopling Indiana book. It's amazing, the amount of detail. Most entered through New York or New Orleans. I don't know how many Midwesterners I've helped do research over the years that completely forget about New Orleans as a potential port. If we had more time to investigate, good old Joseph Kundeck there in Jasper and Du Bois County, selling all those churches, growing up all those churches, he took a trek down the Mississippi and helped establish a church in New Orleans. That's how much the back and forth of Germans were on the mighty Mississippi. So let's tonight make our own little resolution, New Year's resolution, if we can. Let's commit to the details, right? Let's do completely honest efforts to learn all the details of an ancestor's life. And we can only do that if we at least do 2 of the major historical compilations. Let's explore all the geographic histories and all the ethnic and religious histories. So very important. Let's commit to doing that. We will be better researchers and we'll have more of our ancestors' stories. A second type of record I would like us all to commit to are newspapers, okay? They are the chroniclers. They're like the town crier standing in our brains or in our research files saying, hear ye, look in my pages, look on my digitized entities and discover your stories. They are the chroniclers of the lives and times of our ancestors. They already have published our stories. We just need to find them. Think about that. They have already published our stories in the lines of these newspapers. Yes, I know. You know all about the newspaper sites. But do you read them? Do you actually go there and read them? Not all the newspapers can be accurately OCR. And sometimes we need to do the history, right? Instead of just looking for the names. So I have a couple of examples. I'm not going to show you newspapers.com, newspaperarchive.com, because you can get there and play with those. I want to kind of tease you a little bit with look for these kinds of newspapers. So, what about school newspapers? Do you act consistently look for school newspapers in anywhere from 19th, 20th century? This happens to be the Jasper High School newspaper, and that woman is my mother. She never told me anything about the article. What's the article? Two seniors win the discussion contest. Tommy Dick and Doris Englert. I knew she went to Jasper High School, and I knew she was a very good student because that's how she always beat us over the head, figuratively as kids. I was an excellent student. You need to be an excellent student. I studied. You need to study. But in this particular article, oh my gosh, look at this. Down here toward the bottom of the first column tells the topic that she wrote on. I love this paragraph right here. This is a stubborn German, all said in the best sense of the phrase. Doris entered the same contest as a freshman, giving a speech on world peace. She entered again as a sophomore, talking about a famous Indian man. In each of these contests, Doris gave a splendid account of herself. I have to chuckle. I chuckle every time I read that. Yeah, that would be Doris. However, this year, Doris did more than good, give a good speech. She gave the best speech and came out on top. I mean, where are you going to find that kind of story? Yeah, I already know where Doris was born. I already know where Doris married. I know where Doris is living right now as an 83-year-old woman. Where do I find this story? Never heard it from her. Will never hear it from her. So we can find all kinds of newspapers. Going through the same newspaper, look on the left-hand side. Here's all the birthdays. Here's what's going on in the library, the next column. Junior, senior prom, prom committee, the cheer block, honor roll. Why, looky there. There's Doris Englert on the honor roll. Just amazing. Sports review. We know how important sports has always been to high schools. So lots of congratulations, wins and losses, individuals. Wouldn't you like to have that piece of your story? And this is just the back page. On these newspapers, you always look at the ads just to see and notice how many family names are here. And lo and behold, down here in the left-hand corner, there's Theo or Theodore Welt. Does that Welt name sound familiar? Well, that was in the Jasper area history. So we make note of those things. Other newspapers, they are all over the place. This is from Chronicling America. It's an Evansville paper, and it's talking about, pardon the use of the term, stuff that's going on around the world. So here's Turkey and Austria, and they're talking about the Immigration Committee. And notice the names of the individuals and all the activity that's going on with this Immigration Committee. And what notice about where my cursor's hanging here, we have some ethnic groups, and then this wonderfully proud statement. What a wonderful thing immigration and immigration have done for our country. Wow, that's not always embraced, is it? So it's fascinating to see here. Amazing. And then representatives of the convention calling on people to participate. The Fort Wayne Observer, another paper. It's an ethnic paper at the time. Notice the subtitle, Fort Wayne's only Negro newspaper. And look at the kinds of things you have. This is a Fort Wayne paper, but here's happenings in Kent, Ohio. A lovely program was held at the Baptist Church in Ridgeway, Ohio. Tells you who attended. Tells you where these people were weekend guests of these other individuals. Mrs. Donna Wilkins is spending a few days in Bellefontaine, Ohio with relatives. Mr. Jackson is improving at the Hardin Memorial Hospital. All wish a speedy recovery. We know this stuff exists in newspapers, yet to my slide, or to my sentence in the slide a few back. Do we read these? Do we look for this information? I hope increasingly we do. Lima, Ohio news, other news about Central High School here in Fort Wayne, the Green Years, talk about the senior banquet, interesting programs. being planned. Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers is coming to Fort Wayne. Big news, big news. And then I'm going to expand a little bit our definition, if you will, our understanding of newspapers. Fort Wayne's International Harvester was huge in the mid 20th century, from 1930s up through the 1980s. And this is from 1944 during the war years. They had a big tower as part of the plant, sort of fire tower, bell tower. So one of their many publications was called Tower Talk. And what do they have in Tower Talk? All kinds of things. What's going on in the company, how employees are benefiting. But then they also have a lot of what I would call human interest things, right? So here's a group of ladies that went to Chicago together. You know, a snarky part of a person could say, huh, who cares? Well, if any one of these are our family, we automatically care. And don't you ask the question, well, why did these ladies go to Chicago? What's the tie? They just met each other over lunch and the next day they all went to Chicago? Unlikely. So did they work in the same unit? Probably. Well, what's the relationship? And notice Phyllis visits husband. Phyllis Cass returned from work after spending a vacation with her husband in New Haven, Connecticut. Congratulations to Bob. He reports a new son. And you just read on through that. So it's kind of cool. Local folks help soldiers. So in this Tower Talk, in this company newspaper, newsletter, you have how the Christian Service Center was established. Maybe you never knew about the Christian Service Center. Did that affect, touch, influence your ancestor in any way? And then here's sympathies extended to people who have lost members of their family. I mean, pretty amazing. So, are we up to making the commitment to analyze every document thoroughly, every piece of data completely? Allow one document and its data to lead to more documents and more data. That's how doing the history works. That's how you make these critical connections. That's how you connect to new data. It's putting all these pieces together. Now, this is a section, these next couple of examples too. I'm going to have to go through them quickly, but this is ripped from the headlines. What do I mean by that? So a colleague, John, was helping a customer this week try to place a photograph. Knew who was in the photograph, but didn't know a time period. So what our colleague did with our customer is they researched the photographer. And so at the bottom of this image, and we've seen many like this, so lucky. Our customer was so lucky because that photography shop in Fort Wayne was only in existence here in this city for a few years. So you could really narrow down when that person may have been here in the city. It's not 100% sure the person's in the city. It's likely, but not sure. And then that photographer moved over to Ohio. This wasn't the photographer. This is just an example. So expanding, analyzing everything can lead to more information. So stepping out away from our ancestor and spending a little time investigating the photographer. Put just a little more data in the cup, in the silo of our customer. And we're always excited about that. Now, I attended a virtual funeral on Monday. The funeral that I attended was for Father Jack Wintz. He was a professor of mine many moons ago, another lifetime ago, a really amazing gentleman. And this is the obituary taken offline or copied from the memorial site online. And I want to go through this quickly. We don't have time to spend a whole lot of time on it, but this is how we need to analyze everything. So OFM, what does that mean? Well, most Catholics know that means Order of Friars Minor. It's a particular order. So as a good storyteller, researcher, we ask, wonder if that order has any records about him that might shed some more light. Maybe most of them are personal, maybe most of them are restricted, maybe most of them, as he's 84 when he passed, maybe most of them just aren't around anymore. As good researchers, historical detectives, to use a double negative, we can't not look. We have to look. He was a teacher, a missionary, an award-winning journalist, and author. All those different occupations provide the opportunity remote or grand, that there may be some data, some story about him in those various professions. We need to do that. So he died in Cincinnati. We can explore that. Best known as a writer and editor for St. Anthony Messenger Press, Franciscan media. So we need to explore that. Are there possibly any records that would tell us more about his story, more about his life as a part of St. Anthony Messenger Press or Franciscan media? So we should explore that, right? You can see all the red lines. One of 5 children, Batesville, Indiana, went to this school as elementary, then high school seminary, then college in Michigan, then further study, then his first parish, then the first place where he taught. Then he taught at Bishop Luers in Fort Wayne, Indiana. All these are possible story generators. We can find out so much about his life if we just look at all of these. Catholic Press Association. Was he a member? What did he do? Did he receive any kind of notation? Did he have a write-up on him? All these questions. He got the highest honor, St. Francis de Sales Award. Well, was there a write-up? Was there a service? Was there a piece of biographical data about him that would lead me to his family members? And here are his family members. He spent the last part of his life on a very long journey, the long journey home. I think most of us know about that kind of a journey at St. Margaret Hall in Cincinnati. He's survived by a brother and a sister. He's preceded in death by his parents, whom we met at the top of the memorial, and a sister and a brother. Oh my goodness. OMG. We have so much history, so much story that we can follow up on. We need to do that. Funeral was live streamed from St. Clement Church in St. Bernard, and it tells you where he's buried. And it does tell you that it was published in the Cincinnati Enquirer, so we could look there for even more information. So I hope that kind of whets your appetite to not just read through things for names and dates and then move on. Look for other ways of finding story. Context, context, context. As I put in your handout on page 1, context is king. Having a context in which to find our ancestors. I'm going to go through these next couple slides pretty quick. All that other stuff. And what does Curt mean by that? All that other stuff. What is all that other stuff? All that other stuff are the records that we have found that evidence an ancestor. Have we really analyzed them? I'm guessing we haven't. So census. When we hear census, we almost always think federal population schedules. Well, there's more than population schedules. There's agricultural and manufacturing. We'll have a census talk on agricultural schedules next month. You should listen. We've had to talk about mortality schedules. What about slave schedule and business schedules? And the 1890 veteran schedule and state enumerations. Find every census, every enumeration. Find them all and analyze them all. And let's pause quickly here and say, what is a census record? It's an enumeration, right? Are there other enumerations that we've run across? Well, aren't tax lists a type of enumeration? And aren't directories a type of enumeration? Oh my goodness. I always like to talk about directories because we have an awesome collection of directories here in the Genealogy Center. This is the Kane County directory. Notice the person in parens after each person. That's the spouse of the principal person. Kind of an enumeration, right? Cincinnati, Ohio, the 1840 city directory for Cincinnati. In parens after the person's name, not their spouse, but their place of origin. Ohio, Germany, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. That's a kind of enumeration just without that where they're from information. The Georgia State Gazetteer and Business Directory. Do we ever look at these things? Okay, they may not have our ancestor if the ancestor wasn't a business person, but the information they can tell us. So here's the business people, the businesses that they had. But every single town in Georgia tells you the county, tells you what's going on there, tells you the educational institutions, tells you the newspapers. So now you know what schools to look for if you think your ancestor was there, what papers you can begin to peruse, and so many papers are available online. The Boston Almanac, 1892. Well, the 1890 federal population schedule burned, but here's an enumeration of sorts for Boston for 1892, and it lists, besides businesses, organizations. And it tells you the clergymen and the church affiliation. This is the key on the top left-hand side. These are the church people with the abbreviation of their denomination. Here's the Providence directory, a separate segregated list for African Americans, their charitable societies, history of the various societies. Pretty amazing. I love the next two, Muscatine, Iowa history and directory for 1876, 77. Every entry, if it's a farmer or someone who owns property, it tells you where they reside, how much acreage they own, where they were born, and if not born here, when they came to the county, and sometimes when they came to the country. Pretty amazing. Bureau County, Illinois did the same thing. Look at these paragraph size notations. Look at even the thin ones. Farmer, lives with father, Democrat, Lutheran, born in Illinois, born in Pennsylvania. Pretty amazing, absolutely amazing things. Military records. The last bullet point there, we'll start there first. Every generation, the possibility, right? So that means we need to pay attention to them. So we need to find all of them, not just the pension record, not just the service record, but look for the military history. Look for the letters and diaries of soldiers that may have served with your ancestor. Amazing amounts of information. So we're right back where we began, right? So I hope I haven't stressed your patience too much by showing you some pretty specific examples. But we want to do exhaustive research. We want to be complete and accurate. We want to be reliable and skillfully interpret things. And we want to be sound and coherent in how we put things together. But the top one, it's in red because I think it's the most important. Exhaustive research. Details, context, thorough analysis. That's the critical connection of helping us put all the pieces together.